Um, in your experience with people, cultures, and communities, what are the major barriers to inclusion or creating circles? Mr. Obileye, you can take this one. So I'll repeat it again. In your experience with people, cultures, and communities, what are the major barriers to inclusion or creating circles? Do you understand the question?
I hope I do.
Okay, let's hear your answer. Then we'll know.
If I don't, maybe if I'm going off track, that's okay. You're going off track.
No, like I said, anything you both share today will be of benefit. So please go ahead.
Sounds good. So I think it boils down to two things. So one is a lack of tolerance, and then the other thing is an us versus them mindset. And when you really think about Islam, Islam is a very tolerant religion. There's this popular hadith where I think it was a Bedouin or someone came into the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ and started urinating, and then the companions basically were very angry and wanted to beat him up or something like that. And eventually the Prophet told them basically to calm down, as you know, someone who doesn't even know what he's doing, right? And that importance of tolerance, right? There's for me, at least from that hadith, there's two ways to think about it. One way is that if someone is urinating and then you're trying to disturb him, he's going to, urinate all around, cause a bit more of a mess. And so there's no way he's going to be even drawn to Islam. So I think tolerance is something that we don't have. So there's a general lack of tolerance, and it's a huge barrier to inclusion. And it's something that we need to learn from the lesson of our soul to implement in our daily lives. Then the other thing is generally an us versus them mindset. And this is very problematic, right? So this is something that a lot of people have when you go into schools, even from secondary school, it's science class versus art class. Oh, the way art class people behave, or the way Hausa people behave, or the way these Igbos are. It's ingrained into our subconscious, and it leads to all sorts of biases that detract us from having inclusive communities. And for me, when I moved to the UK, very quickly, one of the biggest advice with regards housing I got for London, they said, stay on the west of London and stay north of the Thames. So that was the advice I got, right? Because otherwise they are going to profile you as an immigrant. As it turns out, I did not take that advice, but I think this just shows that there's tons of biases that we have, and we really need to stop having these locals versus immigrant mindset, Muslim versus non-Muslim, Black versus white, MSS versus something else. These things cause challenges, and not to say that it's not important to have some discussions about why the distinctions are there, and not to say that there aren't people who are in the wrong at times, right? Even similar with the example of the Prophet. But we always need to remember that A, we should be tolerant, and B, an us versus them mindset is not going to help in the long run.
Thank you. Mr. Abdulmalik, please, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Just to build on what Abdulhameed said. So, if you go back to, there's an ayah in Quran. I don't know exactly. I know it's in Surah 49, and Allah says that I created you at different cultures to know one another. So I think if you use that as a base, in terms of inclusion, so the barriers to inclusion obviously come from ignorance. So people are not very familiar with different cultures or different religions, for example, different communities. So I think that one of the things is that to try and break down that barrier, for example. So break down that barrier of misunderstanding. Obviously, if you're given the opportunity, because there's some people that you interact with in your life that are going to be very ignorant and they don't want to actually hear what you have to say. So what you should try your best to do is never compromise on your personality or your beliefs to accommodate other people's one. You can obviously agree to disagree, but I'll say the first barrier is always to do with ignorance. And then you talked about, what are the barriers to creating circles. So I think, in terms of circles, so my understanding of the question is there's two things: barriers to integrating and also barriers to creating circles. Because sometimes when you're in a different environment, you actually want to create your own community, whether it's like you want to have your own Nigerian community in London, or whatever you want to do. So there's also the aspect of like-minded. And I think also when you trying to create a like-minded circle, the thing is that to avoid the misconception of us v them, you're creating a like-minded circle because you just want to share ideas about different things. But also I think when you're creating that circle, it should be like, how can we have the same thought process, but how can we also involve other people in the way that we think, or at least share our ideas? So I would say the most important thing in terms of the barriers is definitely ignorance. And going back again to like common thing I was talking about a lot during this call is that just being authentic and just being yourself. And then just sharing your experiences, sharing your opinions, obviously not in a negative way. And I think those are the main challenges and the barriers. I think we're here to learn from one another and not to point the finger and say that I'm better than you. I mean, there's that common thing that says if you point the finger, there's three fingers pointing back at you. So, don't think that you're better than anybody else. You're not put here to be the judge and jury. We're just put here to follow whatever path you're following and be inclusive and not exclusive. Thanks.